Hello, everyone. The Authors Guild Foundation welcomes you to today's event, From Manuscript to Marketplace, featuring the recent novel House of Cotton. This is part of our Business Boot Camps for Writers series, which is funded in part by the National Endowment for the Arts and by Penguin Random House. So thank you to our donors for making this possible. And in the boot camp series, we cover a lot of need to know information like finding an agent, doing your own marketing, working with booksellers. But this series is cool because we get to feature an author with a recent book and members of the publishing team to tell us about their specific recent experiences. So it's sort of a case study of publishing today. Some quick housekeeping. Thanks for submitting questions in advance. That helps shape the talk, but you can use the Q&A box below to add any questions, and we'll get to those toward the end. As always, we're incredibly grateful to our panelists for sharing their time and wisdom today. I'll go ahead and introduce them. We have author Monica Brashears. She is an Afro-Latin writer from Tennessee. She's a graduate of Syracuse University's MFA program. Her work has appeared in Nashville Review, Split Lip Magazine, Appalachian Review, The Masters Review, and more. House of Cotton is her first novel. Nadxieli Nieto is an executive editor at Flatiron Books and on the board of Latinx in Publishing, and she is former director of PEN America's Literary Awards. Claire McLaughlin is a publicity manager at Flatiron Books. She's worked on a wide range of fiction and nonfiction titles, including All Good Dies Dreaming by Xochitl Gonzalez, Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby, and More Myself by Alicia Keys. So I wanted to start off by having Nadxieli and Claire tell us about your jobs briefly so the audience knows who we have here today.
I'll start. I'm Nadxieli Nieto. I'm the editor of House of Cotton, very lucky editor of House of Cotton at Flatiron. I acquire both fiction and nonfiction and a wide range within those. I think one of the great things about working at Flatiron is that we get to work in so many different genres and we get to sort of do so many different types of books. So one day I might be falling in love with a Southern Gothic, and the other day I might be working on a family drama, and another day I might be working on a sort of very heavily researched book of nonfiction that maybe has an argument about something in our world, like one that I'm working on about parole or things like that. And as an editor, my job is to not only edit the book, make a case for the book in-house, but also to be its sort of project manager and cheerleader throughout the entire sort of publication cycle. And one of the amazing people I get to work with during that time is Claire. And as you know, if any of you have friends who are authors or who have published books, you know that publishing is really a team sport. And one of the great things about getting to work on this book and also at Flatiron in general is getting to work with so many great people like Claire. So I'm going to popcorn it over to her. Claire.
Thanks, Nadji. My name is Claire McLaughlin. I'm a publicity manager at Flatiron. And so my role kind of in the process of bringing a book to marketplace, so to speak, is to kind of be the person who is reaching out to media, kind of all levels of media, from TV and radio and podcasts to, national newspapers, magazines, and then even doing kind of the ground level outreach to like book bloggers and things like that. So really getting the word out about the book to set up review coverage, interviews, making sure that the book is on roundups and all kinds of coverage that you see, broadcast, print, online. And then another big part of my job also is setting up author tours. So Monica was just out on the road about a month ago. And so I work with bookstores to kind of set up events and then coordinate author tours so that we are getting, the book and the author out in front of people in real life as well. So yeah, as Nadji said, we do a lot of different kinds of books at Flatiron. So I also have the great luck to work on a lot of different types of titles. And I think Flatiron is special in that we have kind of a limited curated list. So I really get to spend a lot of time with all of the books, all of which are really wonderful. But I do have to say that I love working on debut fiction. So House of Cotton was a dream and just kind of, my favorite type of book to work on. So yeah, that is a little about publicity from my end.
Thank you. So Monica, congrats on the book. And why don't you tell us a little about House of Cotton? I saw that it started as a short story when you were an undergraduate. Is that right?
Yes, that is right. It started as a really stiff short story for workshop. And then I shelved it and I went to the MFA program, and in a flash fiction course, the protagonist kind of came back to me and I became obsessed. But it follows 19-year-old Magnolia Brown, who loses her grandmother and is pregnant, and has a predatory landlord. And she eventually takes a job modeling in a funeral parlor.
All right. Now, as you know, a lot of people want to know about finding an agent. Can you tell us about your experience getting agented?
Yes. So a mentor initially connected me with an agent, and we were working together, but I realized it wasn't the right fit once I had like revision advice given by her that I didn't really connect with. So then I started Googling like top 10 literary agencies, and I worked my way down the list, and I was just throwing it out there. I didn't really know what I was doing. So I'm with PJ and Afisa at Janklow and Nesbitt. I initially sent to Luke Janklow because I was like, his name's in the business, he must be. And he forwarded it to PJ and Afisa, and we had a call, and I initially told them no, actually. And then I later was like, wait, I am having regret. So I scrambled back, and luckily it worked out, and we went from there.
That's great. What was your relationship like with them on this book? How involved were they in the editorial before you submitted it?
They were pretty involved. They gave me some really helpful feedback. And then I did like one bulk revision. And then we had another call over the end because I thought I wrote a happy ending, but I was mistaken.
Okay. So Nadji, what drew you to the book, and when did you first see it?
Well, so I think there's a lot of different things that draw people to books. I'm somebody who's really drawn to language-driven work that does something interesting and playful with prose. I'm a New Yorker, and if anybody spent any time in New York, they know that New Yorkers really love language and playing with language. And that holds for lots of different regions of the United States, including Appalachia. And I was immediately, from like the first few sentences, drawn into just the beauty of her prose. Some people can write in a way that you can feel the sentences in your body, and it feels like luscious and delicious, and you just want to stay in their words. And I felt that from the first paragraph. It was definitely a compelling pitch, and she did not spoil anything that happens in the book, because there was quite a lot happens after the character Magnolia takes on this job at the funeral home, and there's lots of twists and turns. And so I knew some of that was coming from the pitch, but what really drew me in at the time was the language and the character of Magnolia. I'm also really drawn to books that are really voice driven, where you as a reader would follow that character wherever they went, no matter what they were doing. They could be folding laundry for 3 days, and you would be happy to sit by their side because they're just cracking jokes the whole time. They're so funny, and the way that they see the world makes it sparkle for you anew. And Monica has that quality with her prose, and she created this like very vibrant, wonderful, complicated, nuanced, funny as all get out, sharp like character in Magnolia. And like our book team is called, like on this book, it's called Team Magnolia. And like I would die for Magnolia. And I remember like we got one of our cover comps in, and we had like 3 covers to look at. And an editor, my assistant editor that worked with me on this question, looked at one of them and said, Magnolia would never wear a turtleneck. And it's just like we all felt like we knew the character so well. We could pull things off a rack in a store and say what she would like and what she didn't like. Like that's how well wrought the character was. And I felt that immediately. Now, then you're like, okay, do I keep reading? Like I have to keep reading. What's going to happen? And, obviously, like, I think that Monica is a brilliant writer, But I also want to remind people in the audience that so much of publishing is about the combination of luck and hard work and a whole bunch of other things that I don't even know how to name. And one of the things that happened on this morning, I just looked this up in my email. It was a Tuesday morning, and her agent PJ, who I knew fairly well, we knew each other's sort of styles and what we were looking for. He put in the work with me to sort of get it to know me and know what my list was like, what I wanted. And he sent me, I think he might have called me up, I don't remember. And then he sent me her submission. And it just so happened that my meeting was canceled that morning, because otherwise that submission might have languished in my email box for another 3 days until I had another break or something like that. But it happened that day, my meeting was canceled. I read it. I got it in at 10 o'clock. By like 10:30, I was texting and emailing her agents, being like, oh my God, what have you done to me? I love this. And just texting them lines. And I kept reading. The email string is like by 11 a.m. I emailed it to my publisher. Because that's the other thing. I work with a lot of people, and the money is not my own. If I want to buy a book, I have to convince all the people in the house that it's a good book for the publisher. Emailed my publisher, gave my jazz hands, did my pitch. And I was like, we have to put together a P&L immediately, emailed our marketing director, our publicity director. And I was like, I want this so bad. And, started the wheels in motion. My publisher read it overnight. I canceled my date that evening. I stayed up, read it overnight. I think we had a meeting. That was a Tuesday. I think we met. I met Monica and we had a conversation over Zoom, because it was still during the pandemic, on Thursday morning or Thursday early afternoon. And I preempted it overnight, I think Friday. By Friday, I had bought the book. And I want to say, not all book sales go that quickly. That is not the case for all of the books that I love and that I bought. This one happened to move exceptionally quickly. But I knew that other people were going to fall in love with it the way that I fell in love with it. And I didn't want them to have any time to get their ducks in a row. And so I went ahead and sort of, tried to move really quickly on that. But it was, again, from the first page, the voice and the language. Sorry to wax on about that, but I could talk about her book forever.
Of course. So obviously a great manuscript is above all what's important. But what can authors do to put themselves in the best position? Is it having a good marketing plan or something else that they should bring to the table?
I mean, I think it's really different for fiction and nonfiction. For fiction, most fiction pitches and proposals don't come with a marketing plan. So that's not something I'm looking at for fiction. For fiction, ideally, the author has worked with their agent closely and they have a good relationship, so the pitch is really strong. What that looks like when it comes into me is an email that's generally got about 3 paragraphs, a fairly simple summary of the book, but also a contextualizing of the book. I think a lot of people, when they're sort of trying initially to talk about their own book, get sort of bogged down and try to make it sound like big and like it's the best thing since Toni Morrison and this, that, and very grand sort of proclamations. And the pitches actually would kind of really just want to know what's about to happen in the book. It's almost like a synopsis. It's like a synopsis plus, because you do want to sort of just brass tacks, like what's kind of going to happen. What is the book in conversation with? This is where an agent will share comps if they want to. They don't always. Agents will generally say, it's like a mix of this, this, and this. Or we could see this being like the second coming of this or something like that. And then a short paragraph about the author and the actual book. And so that's generally all we're seeing. Yeah. So first, I say the first 100 pages, if you can have a really tight first 100 pages, if I get to page 99, I'm invested in your book. It's unlikely that I'm going to put it down at that point because I feel like I can maybe fix something if it comes up. I do think that you need a fair bit more than your first chapter to really hook an editor. And so, yes, absolutely have a, really great opening sequence and tight first chapter. But if you can go at least, I mean, obviously do the whole thing beautifully if you can, but really making sure that it's in the read, because that's the most important thing for fiction.
Now, a few people have asked if you're taking submissions, but you're not open to submissions right now. So Flatiron, there's normal channels to submit. We have about 250 people watching, so it would be far too many manuscripts for Flatiron to take on if everybody here wanted to submit.
Right. So Flatiron, I mean, in general at Flatiron, and I would say pretty commonly across the big five, we don't generally accept unsolicited submissions or unagented submissions. It's a little more common for an editor to go out and find somebody in nonfiction and work with them and try to find them an agent together and sort of build a project together. But in fiction, generally, it's coming through an agent, and that is, to your point, because the volume is so high. Even with agented submissions, the volume is really, really high. So yeah, that said, Flatiron doesn't ever close down for submissions from agents and agented submissions. I love the idea of that, but we have not done it yet.
Okay. So let's talk about the editorial process a bit. How much did the book change from acquisition to acceptance? How did that go?
I think, Monica can speak a little bit more about this, but, she did have really good agents, and, they both have great editorial eyes. Hafiza, one of her agents, used to be an editor as well, and as a writer herself, really good eye. And she also happened to have worked with some really great professors at her in her MFA program. So the book came in really, really great shape. I don't think we did that much on this one. There are certain books where I, bring something back to the studs and really rebuild it. This was not the case with House of Cotton. I don't know, Monica, you want to speak a little bit more?
Yeah, I think also this isn't something I sought out intentionally, but PJ and Hafiza both work with younger authors or debuts. So that's probably why they were so willing to guide with revision. So that's something to consider. But Nadji is a poet, so we focused a lot on line level stuff, which I thought would be the easy part, but yeah, it was really lovely, just getting notes on sound.
And I have to add that her book, if you've not read it yet, has these wonderful little, very weird, very cool fairy tales sort of interspersed throughout, that is like a sort of dissociative mode that the character Magnolia goes into. And so we played around with those a little bit. And that was, as an editor, I have to say, so fun to work with. I used to teach a fairy tale class, and I don't get to do a lot of that work. And it was so fun to see Monica's take on it, which was different than anything I'd seen before. So that was fun to revise with her.
So Claire, can you tell us a little about your experience with the book? At what point do you get involved?
Yeah, so I feel like Flatiron is a sort of tight-knit imprint, so we often will hear kind of titterings of what is being acquired and what's going on even kind of that early on. But I think really when it starts for me is probably 9 or 10 months before a book goes on sale. We have something called launch, which is a day when Nadji and all of the other editors are presenting all of the books for a forthcoming season in the future. Yeah, so Nadji will kind of do her spiel, and it's kind of the first official sort of presentation of the book, not only to the whole Flatiron team, but also to our sales team, so that she can kind of get early feedback on it, and also so that publicity and marketing can kind of hear what's coming and be assigned what they're going to work on in that future season. And so for us, it's really like Christmas, because we just get to sit back, hear about all of these great books. It's very stressful for Nadji and the editors, I think, or a lot of work at least. But then what happens is that we get to kind of, to our department head, submit bids on what we most want to work on. And so I had kind of heard already that House of Cotton was coming. And then once it was officially launched, I was like, this is my #1 pick for, spring 2023. And so, I try and drop hints also to our department head, being like, I'm so excited that this book is coming. So I was thrilled to be assigned to work on it. And this was also a book that we did have advanced copies for quite early on. So I think this was a priority fiction title for us. And so it's one of those books that quite early on, you know, like 6 or 7 months before it comes out, I will send out a note to some of the kind of long lead media contacts who really want to be hearing about big books early. And so that's what I did with this one. And then I would say, typically like the real campaign starts to get underway like 4 or 5 months before publication. And so that's when you do kind of wide outreach. You know, as a publicist and as a department, we have, you know, hundreds of media contacts, and we kind of put together a list of who we want to be reaching out to about the book. And we tailor those lists based on the book and the different elements in it. So, you know, as Nadji was saying, this is such a literary book. And so it's really the type of thing that you can be pitching to super literary outlets for review coverage, but it also has these very contemporary like genre elements. And so we made sure that we had like horror contacts and things like that on the list. And also, you know, all of the places that particularly are interested in debuts. And so I kind of put together a list and then do a lot of outreach. And then the next few months are kind of just continuing to follow up with people, sending really personalized pitches to people that I know who I think would really like the book, and also kind of pulling out the things that I know each individual person would find compelling about it. And so in that regard, again, I feel like House of Cotton, there was so much to work with in terms of the different elements at play. And so it was really fun for me to kind of really get creative and pull out the different things that would be relevant for different people. And so that is kind of how the publicity campaign works. And there are different types of outlets where, you know, certain magazines you want to be reaching out to 4 or 5 months in advance. And then there are some like shorter lead newspapers and websites where they will maybe be making decisions about things like a month or 3 weeks before a book goes on sale. So it's kind of a lot of pitching and getting the word out. And then in the last few weeks before publication, I feel like that's when everything comes together and you get all of this stuff confirmed, and you start to get reviews in. So that is like a second Christmas, I feel like, when publication comes around and you get, you know, all of the wonderful reviews that Monica got for the book and things like that. Yeah, so that's kind of where I start with it. And I guess I should say too, you know, when we're setting up things like book tours, we're typically reaching out to stores like several months in advance about that. And, you know, Nadji and Monica and I worked throughout the process on kind of putting together written Q&As and kind of press materials that would help supplement the outreach that I was doing to places. So kind of having a written Q&A and like lists of things Monica could speak to really helps when you're pitching things like interviews and things like that. So those are the types of things that we kind of work on together throughout the process. Oh yes, yeah. And then not to speak or take credit for our wonderful marketing team, but they're kind of doing consumer facing and bookstore facing promotion and outreach throughout the process. So as Nadji just showed, they put together this incredible box that they sent out to bookstores and influencers and people like that to kind of get the word out. And I guess the one thing I forgot to mention too is that Monica and I got to go on a pre-sale tour in January before the book came out, which is something that we don't do for every book, but that is additional kind of bookstore outreach where we got to go to Washington, D.C. and San Francisco and Los Angeles and have dinner with booksellers in each of those cities to kind of get them excited about the book, you know, well ahead of pub. So that was also something that was a lot of fun and a way that we kind of drum up the buzz and sort of signal how excited we are about the book.
Wow, that's really cool. That must have been fun. No spoilers, but I was just saying it's kind of funny given the content of the book to be like sitting on Zoom, reacting when people talk. So I was going to ask about genre, but first, Monica, were you just writing this to be a great book, or did you have horror, gothic, or any other kind of labels in mind when you were writing it?
So growing up, my mom had a lot of Stephen King, and I was raised Southern Baptist, so it was a very scary childhood. So I find that I'm naturally drawn to the kind of creepy. There's usually a dark underbelly to everything I write.
So a lot of authors ask about pitching, whether it's, you know, the querying process or writing or submitting. if it's, complicated to have a book that fits into multiple genres, or if they really need to pitch it as one thing. How do you feel about that, Claire? You mentioned including different outlets based on that, but is it a challenge or a good thing to have it fit into multiple categories?
I mean, I feel like Nadji can maybe speak to how that works on kind of the more editorial end of things. I think from a publicity, I mean, first of all, I feel like you should write the book that you are meant to write, and you should focus on that and not be, I guess, during the writing process overly trying to like tailor it to fit certain categories or anything like that. I think that is sort of the publishing process can kind of help direct things as they need to go. I would say publicity is a little bit different because I think we are not directly pitching the book to consumers. And so I think that we are kind of reaching out to bookstores and also media members who then kind of talk to consumers about it, whether it be through interviews or reviews or things like that. So I think in terms of like comp titles or also just different categories and things like that, sometimes I think publicity has a little bit more flexibility where I could reach out to someone and say, hey, I know that you don't normally cover this type of book necessarily, but I know that you really loved this book or that you have this particular interest in like fairy tales or something like that. And you can pitch them the book and then they might end up covering it. So I think it's kind of the accumulated knowledge that I have about the various outlets and contacts and what they might like. And then really, I think the job of a publicist is to kind of find the things that different people will find compelling about the book. And every book contains so many different elements. And so I think, that's almost an asset for me to have like different things that I can pull out of it, whether it be the Southern Gothic elements, the horror elements, the contemporary coming of age story, those things. I think different book people out there cover different elements of all of those things. And so I think it is definitely helpful for me. But also I think, it's my job to like find those things in the book and then find the right people for it. So yeah, I think that that's something that happens to some extent with every book. But Nadji, I know that it kind of is maybe a little bit different on the editorial end of things in terms of like genre and comp titles and things like that.
Yeah, so positioning is something that actually starts really early on, and it's a conversation. It's something and that shifts a little bit during the publication process. So the agent is thinking about the positioning as they send me the pitch, and that's how they're designing their comps. That's how they're deciding on what the 3 comps they might want to share with me are. And a lot of people think of comps as like my book is exactly like this other book, apples to apples, and that's not always the case. And I think comps are used really differently at different stages in the process. I like to think of comps as like, if your book was hosting a dinner party, who would your book want to invite and be in conversation with, and what would make that dinner party really fun and special? So it's like what other books your book is in conversation about. And sometimes I'll be a little wacky with mine, or be like a little slant with mine. When we're talking about books in-house more casually, we comp them to TV shows and movies and music even, and all sorts of other things to try to find the language to describe in-house what you think that book is going to be. So as soon as I get that pitch, I'm reading what the agent, and I'm thinking about what the agent is saying and how they want to position it. And I may agree or disagree. And oftentimes I'm shifting that slightly when I talk to my people in-house. So I might say, yes, this agent says it's like these things, but I know that it's also like this other book that my publisher loves. Or it's also like this other book that I think actually did better, had more sales, and I really want to spend a little bit more money on this book. So I'm going to try to put it more in that category. And so I'm then having a conversation. So in Monica's case, that conversation happened between Tuesday and Thursday. I had a lot of conversations in-house with my publisher, with the marketing people, with sales people, in terms of thinking about what that positioning would look like. And so from a very early stage, we're saying, I think this could be like these books. And I think we could, if we did this right and put, this kind of marketing behind it, we could sell this many copies. We don't really know. I mean, it's all guesses. but we're making that case. And so that positioning conversation happens really early. And in fact, if you can't, as an editor, make a good case for how to position a book, you are not going to be allowed to buy it. That is part of your job from the get, is to be able to say, this is exactly how I would publish it. These are the kinds of readers I think will be drawn to it. It will live on the shelf next to these books. And I think it could be a contender for these prizes. Like, you're saying all of that very early on in the conversation with your publisher. As the book gets finished, you're continuing that conversation. That conversation is part of the conversation around book covers. Different book covers for the same book will speak to very different audiences. And so you might have 3 different covers that really actually, in some ways, encapsulate the book, but they're all sort of hitting a different aspect of it. And you have to decide which one of those you want. You know, one of my professors at my MFA, Michael Burkhardt, used to say that there are 3 poems in every poem, and you have to just decide which one you want. And that's kind of what positioning is. For Claire, having those 3 poems in one poem is great because she can use each different little aspect of talk. But there is something reductive in some ways about positioning. We have to tell booksellers kind of what shelf we want to put it on. We have to tell readers that it's kind of this kind of book that they're going to like. And so that happens throughout the process. And then we get feedback from sales at different points, and they say, you know, I think if we actually change this word to this word, or change the cover color from blue to pink, it'll speak to this other audience. So there's lots of people having that conversation.
We've been saying comps a lot. We're saying comparable titles. No, no bad questions. It's okay if you don't know the jargon of the industry.
We use a lot of lingo in this business. I apologize. I'm happy to answer any questions about that.
So, so this is great, and a lot of authors, a lot of books don't necessarily get this kind of attention from the publisher. But this is all good information, I think, because even if you're self-publishing, these are all things you have to do or hire someone to do. So it's good. It's good to get this granular detail. Can we talk about the launch? You mentioned the pre-launch events, and there was some tour afterward. I know it's only been a month since the book came out, but how did that go?
Yeah. Monica, do you want to talk a little bit about it? I don't want to step on your toes.
You go first.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think we had a lot of great kind of events lined up for Monica in the first couple weeks. And I think the official launch was actually a couple of days before the book came out in Syracuse, which is where Monica did her MFA and maybe where Magnolia was born, could we say? So I think that was, again, don't want to speak for you, Monica, but a kind of special place to launch the book. And then we also had the chance to have an event at McNally Jackson in New York the day after Pub. And so we got to kind of, as a Flatiron team and a kind of team Magnolia, kind of got to have, I think at least for Nadxieli and me, that was like our launch, to be able to sort of celebrate with Monica in person, and then send her off on the road the week after that to hit several other stores kind of in different parts of the country. So I think that is a kind of special thing that we're able to do again now that we're kind of not in the thick of the pandemic anymore. And yeah, so I think launch is like often like an event or events, but also I think, as I mentioned earlier, that's when a lot of press is coming in for the book too. So I think there was a lot of celebrating over email as like great reviews are coming in and things like that. So I think it's a combination of seeing all the great coverage and then also being able to do some in-person stuff too.
I don't really know that I have anything else to add, but it was really fun doing Nana's makeup at the McNally Jackson launch. Just like tying in different parts of the book and different events, like at the Novel Neighbor in St. Louis, we had Campari spritzes. So it was kind of like nice celebrating in these ways with the readers and future readers and booksellers.
Nadji, what was in the promo box? Could you hold that up again if you have it?
Yes, it was a little mailer. Sorry, I had the chat open in front of me. A little mailer, and it had some of the wonderful blurbs that she got in the very beginning. And this is twine features in the book for one of the characters that was bound in twine. And there is a a lipstick. I'm not going to try to open it because my nails are short, but it's a Carolina Nettle red lipstick and a Twizzler, which all feature in the book. They won't make sense until you read the book, but yeah, she was very lucky to have really great blurbs come in early, and there were so many things to play with that were fun in the book. So we were able to make that box. Claire has done an amazing job getting such great review coverage since the publication. The New York Times gave it a wonderful review and called it magnetic, singular, and completely unforgettable. I mean, it's gotten a lot of great press, but she was lucky to get these early blurbs so we could do this cute little box. It's not always the case with our books, but we had it in really early, which helped with all of this drumming up of press and bookseller support.
Monica, about bookstore appearances, what have you done, or online or bookstores, what have you done for reading selections? You read the first chapter, or how long do you read?
I think the reading is like 15 minutes, 10 or 15 minutes. I have been reading the same one at every place when Magnolia has dinner with Cotton and learns about the business, because I feel like that's a good spot. It was difficult because I didn't want to like spoil anything, you know.
That makes sense. All right. Well, I guess we can get to, we've got a lot of questions, so I'll go ahead and move to some of the audience questions. Any advice for debut novelists in particular these days? Nadji, I guess.
During the submission process?
Yeah, you know, we actually invited some MFA programs where we have contacts to attend today. So we probably have more than usual number of recent grads watching. Do you have advice for them?
Well, you know, I would say during the submission process, that can last a really long time or it can be really short. One thing I would say is that, you know, the green-eyed monster will get you in the end. I think a lot of my advice around the submission process is like self-care and psychological. My old professor, George Saunders, once told me, he was like, writers will have to like contend, and I'm badly paraphrasing, I apologize to him, will have to contend with two things in their lifetime, their craft and their ego. And you think it's your craft that's going to get you, but it's really your ego. And no matter, you know, at the end of the process, no matter how happy you are with how it turns out, or the actual process of going on submission is nerve-wracking for everybody. It is like an emotional roller coaster, and you should be very gentle with yourself during that process. I think it's good to get yourself a group of friends, find your people who are going to cheerlead you and support you through that process, and try as much to generate happiness and compassion and support for other people who may be getting the thing that you want to get at that moment. Because, you know, I have friends who are brilliant authors who queried for 3 years before finding an agent, and then went on to query for 2 years before getting somebody to buy their book, and then won prizes. You know, and this is what I mean by the luck plus the hard work, and actually I should add persistence to that, because it's everybody's, there's no singular book journey. Everybody's looks really different. And I think when we get into comparative mode, that can really bring us down. So I would say most of my suggestions are around just self-care. By the time you're going out on submission, you've done all of the hard work. You should have done all of the hard work. You should have worked as long as you can on your own book to the point where you feel like you've done all you can do yourself. And then you want to send it to some friends or readers, blah, 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 and get their feedback. And then you want to send it out to agents. And then when you find an agent, you want to work with that agent on it. So by the time it's coming to me, you've done a lot of the hard work. You've gotten it as far as you can get it. Your agent has gotten as far as you can get it. And you can really rely on your agent to handle that. Like, your job is to not like drive yourself insane during the process of waiting. That is really your job. It's like to make sure that you eat, to make sure that you sleep, and to make sure that you know, don't get in such a huge fight with your beloveds that you end up divorced, or, you know, all of these other things that can happen when you're misplacing your anxiety, because it is a sort of traumatic experience. So a lot of that work happens before submissions. And it's that making sure that first 100 pages is really tight, and making sure that you and your agent are on the same page with a pitch. And, you know, working to get that right will make all the difference in the submission process.
You mentioned you bought the book on preempt. Could you define that, please?
So I've worked for a number of different presses, and before joining Flatiron, which is an imprint at one of the big five at Macmillan, I worked with indie presses. And when you work with indie presses and micro presses, you don't generally go to auctions, because it's like a different level of spending. And so sometimes you're cultivating and developing the work from an earlier stage, or doing things like that. But when you're at, you know, some of these imprints where we're a general sort of trade publisher, a lot of our books end up going to auction. And it is what it sounds like, sort of like, you know, we're not sitting in a room holding up paddles, but we are like, it'll be something like, you have to send me your first offer or your best offer by 11 a.m. on Thursday. And there's different kinds of auctions. So sometimes it's a round robin, which everybody sort of goes around. After that round, I'll get a phone call and the agent will be like, it's at X amount. We're raising in increments of X amount. Do you want to raise? And you have to go back to your publisher and be like, I need more money or whatever, and then call them back in 20 minutes. It's that, as an editor, is exciting the first time you do it, maybe really stressful pretty much every other time. And there are others where it's just a best bid with an opportunity to improve, is what they call it. And in that case, you're sending in your offer, and if you're in the top 2 or 3, they'll be like, it's tight. Do you want to, you know, add a sweetener or something like that? And so it is like an auction where you're sort of slowly raising the money. And obviously, like, you don't want to spend all of your publisher's money, but it does get into that mentality of that sort of auctiony where you're like in it and you're like, I want it. And you're sort of getting all riled up. So a preempt, which is what I did with Monica's book, because I don't love the stress of auctions, is I want you to preemptively take this off the table. I love this book so much. I don't want any other editors to have more time with it, to have another week until our closing date, to get their ducks in a row, to get their money in order, to convince their teams. I've gone through the labor of trying to convince my team overnight. I've made them all read it overnight. So I want to get this off the table. So that's what a preempt is. And so you're negotiating that generally on the phone with the agent, and there's some back and forth, and they say, you know, that's not enough to take it off the table. And you say, what if I give you an extra $1? Or, you know, what if I promise you X? And you negotiate that way. So that's what a preempt is, taking it off the table preemptively.
Mm-hmm. A few people asked about any changes since COVID. Is there a backlog? Are pub dates still getting pushed out, or is everything kind of normalized at this point?
I don't know that there's, so like a backlog in reading submissions, or a backlog in publishing?
Submissions, I think they meant.
Okay, so there's always a backlog in submissions, because we don't ever close down for submissions. So if any of you in MFA programs have worked for Lit Mags or something, when I used to work for Lit Mags several decades ago, like, we would always shut down for a few months, 3 months or something, to catch up on the backlog. We don't do that in publishing. So there's always a backlog. We're always behind. A little known secret is that most editors do the majority of their reading nights and weekends, because the majority of our days are just occupied by meetings and emails. You've heard so many of the things that it takes to sort of bring a book to the reader, to bring a book to market. And we're sort of project managing a lot of that. And so there's a lot of work that goes into the process of making a book, between acquiring it and getting it out the door and in the hands of readers. So that takes up the majority of our day-to-day sort of 9 to 5. So the reading happens in these odd hours, and that means we're even more backlogged. So be gentle with editors if they don't get back to you right away and stuff like that. We're all trying our hardest, and we really care about this, which is why we're doing it. But don't always get to be speedy.
Monica, a few questions for you. What surprised you the most about the process, and or what do you wish you had known going in?
The writing process or the publishing?
Yeah, the publishing process.
There were so many surprises because I didn't know anything, I think. It takes a long time for a book to become like a physical thing. So the cover, seeing the cover, and like, I guess, learning the process of promotion and seeing the box and like the lists involved, a lot of lists, who to send books to, who to think of to send or ask for blurbs, all of that. What do I wish I had known? I didn't know so much, so
Yeah.
any part of it, really.
Well, that's why we're here. Yeah, of course. Have you started on another book yet? I mean, you finished writing this one a while ago at this point then.
Yeah, I'm currently finishing up revisions on my second novel. It's a trailer park noir.
Okay. Do you? Someone asked if you feel pressure about the next book, since this one has gotten, well reviewed and all that.
Yes, I just last night I was reading a New York Times article from like, I don't know, the 80s, people that were like talking about their sophomore novel and giving advice, and I was trying to internalize it. We'll see.
All right. Well, I think we've answered most of the most popular questions we've gotten, so we can end here. Thank you all so much. This has been a great chat. It's great to feature House of Cotton. Congrats again. If anyone in the audience has questions, you can contact me at support@authorsguild.org, and I'll send a follow-up email to everyone who registered for this event. But again, thank you, Nadji, Claire, and Monica. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for the questions, everyone.